It is Friday, December 6th. Let's talk PlayStation. Welcome back to another PlayStation episode of LTPS. We've got a lot of 30th anniversary nostalgia going on, which we will talk about in a second. But first, as always, a very brief reminder for the PS Plus Essential December lineup, which is now live on PSN, so you can go ahead and claim those games. And also, let's go into our first story. We have a new PS5 system software update, that one being 24.08, 10.40. This one only has 2 changelog items. They've, of course, improved the messages and usability on some screens, but they've also improved the process of transferring data from another PS5 and enhanced the stability when transferring large amounts of data, such as captures. So nice to have. I mean, most people are probably not going to be doing this. If anything, it's one circumstance where people probably just did this recently when upgrading from a standard PS5 over to a Pro, but less common would be a base console to, say, a Slim, because there's really no need to do that per se. But if you do go through this process, it should be a lot more reliable. I myself have done it a few times now, if only because of a byproduct of this channel and having to capture footage or doing tips and tricks or something like that. But just recently doing it with a Pro, you know, it can take a while if you are moving over a lot of data. It can be a little bit finicky where one console might get dropped or stuck in the transfer loop, so it's a pain to reset it. I will say with captures in particular, that has been an issue where captures don't get moved over for some reason, and you have to like redo it again, which is also a pain. And that is the one of only 2 ways, I think, to move captures from on console to another one. You can always offload them, of course, via USB, but if you want them to live in the capture gallery on the console and move that to a different one, you have to do it via system transfer, or I believe a backup will work as well. So now that that's more reliable, that's good news. Now, of course, the much more interesting update from this past week was actually the system features update, where that's not quite a full firmware update. You don't go through the whole updating process, but you do a standard console reset, and then server side, you then see some changes on your console. So in this case, you were now greeted with the iconic Sony computer entertainment splash screen and boot up sequence, which did not sport the original PS1 logo, but it did do the SCE splash screen, and then it leaded into a 30th anniversary logo. And that was one amazing, but that also led into another part of the celebration where you were then prompted to celebrate with a background on your console, a slight background per se. So basically, as you all know, you now have the option of selecting a generation of PlayStation 1 through 4, or just you can choose a 30th anniversary sort of generic logo to celebrate this. But you would then be able to pick a generation, and then it would overlay a PNG on top of or on the bottom of the screen. Depends on where you are on the console. On the home screen, it would be up top. On the control center, it would be on the bottom. But you would then be able to see a PS1 console, the iconic PS2 towers, the PS3 XMB waves, or the PS4's waves as well. And the keytones can change. The background for settings can have a slight hue change to better match that particular console. It is undeniably one of the coolest things that the company has ever done in quite a long time as far as like these things go, right? Very cool. Didn't know it was happening. I think it caught us all off by surprise, especially because this is the first time where the console has ever had a way to customize the home screen in such a manner where it lives on every single screen that you travel through the console, which I will say, right, as much as I love it, this is a little goofy in that with the PNG image, it's not dynamic or anything. It kind of just overlays on top of the art, both on top of the screen or on the bottom. So it looks very, I'll admit, out of place, as cool as it is. Sony does say it's only for a limited time, which is also a huge bummer because as amazing as it is going to go away, I would assume within the next few days, maybe a week or so. Who knows how long they want to really celebrate the 30th anniversary, but it's only here for a limited time. I don't know if that's like a matter of them being that concerned about like whatever sort of memory constraint that has on the console, and they don't want to have to always account for that for every single new firmware if a user wants to leave this stuff on, because I'm wondering why they would not leave this as an option. I would have to imagine maybe that's what it is. But it should stay here, obviously. But yeah, it's nice. It's such a cool little nod. I mean, obviously I was geeking out at having the XMB waves, even though they're not moving. But having them on there, they're black, by the way. That was always my favorite XMB color, which they took that away on like firmware 2.50 or something like that on PlayStation 3. But Anyway, the black XMB waves, you also have a cool little nod in the top right corner, which could change to a memory card, or in the case of PlayStation 3, the little news scroller. The keytones as well, right? That was, I was geeking out at that as well, where you had the standard XMB clicks chime in going through the menu there. So it's unbelievably cool. And it's a very nice nod to PlayStation history to be able to pick the generation that you have the most fondness for and have that live on your console for a little bit. I still think like the PNGs look admittedly a little silly, but it's still a cool nod nonetheless. Now, we of course also have to mention the thank you video as well that the company put out for the 30th anniversary, which was not something for new game announcements or anything like that, but it was still this 2-minute sort of nostalgia video, just simply thanking their customers over 30 years of business now at this point, which I can always appreciate these. They've done a handful of them over the years, which, you know, in this case, if you have been with PlayStation for a very long time, then it's quite easy to really indulge in that nostalgia, because it is really cool how they're saying it's about blank. So in some cases it's adventure, family, love, fantasy, and there's all these cool transitions showing, say, certain PS1 franchises and their modern entries next to them. You know, multiple iconic first and third party franchises were represented, plenty of new and old showing up in there. Obviously, they're leaning a lot into some of the more new entries on PlayStation, but you're seeing some old ones in there as well. Some of my favorite nods that I saw was it's about resistance. It's about creativity, Little Big Planet. It's about mischief, Katamari there. And of course, it's about heroics, Jak and Daxter. You love to see it, baby. And what's funny is that the very last one was it's about persistence, and that was Bloodborne, which obviously we can chalk that up to persistence, you know, going over and over and over again, trying to beat those bosses that are really tough. Earlier in the video was also, it's about souls, which showed demon souls. So why was Bloodborne last? Why are they saying persistence? I will say the people in charge of making those videos know damn well what they're doing. Obviously, we've had Bloodborne teases and references, and this is the same rant I'll always have, which is like, as far as we know right now, nothing's actually happening with Bloodborne. It's the same thing that everybody else will say. I can't believe they still have not done anything with this game just yet. How have they not, at the very minimum, ported it to PC, do a native PS5 version? You don't have to do anything crazy. Just give it 60 FPS, sell it again. Obviously, people just want this game slightly improved on PC, PS5. We can say that all day, every day, but there's seemingly nothing going on right now. But having said that, they will always reference and throw nods or Easter eggs at many franchises, Bloodborne included. So every time they do it does not necessarily mean they are teasing that the game is getting ported or something. So it's just, at a certain point, my God, does it get so exhausting seeing another Bloodborne thing blow up on Reddit and Twitter and everywhere else, just because, God forbid, Sony actually said something about it, which they consistently do with all their other old IP, and that's just a thing. Having said that, obviously they're just being a little bit cheeky here. They know damn well what they did by putting it near the end, saying it's about persistence. But as far as we know, nothing's still coming just yet. With all that in mind, though, I still think this video was, very cool. One of my favorites. It's right up there with, that one commercial they did showing the kid in the bedroom and it going back and forth, the hashtag PlayStation memories, building up to PlayStation 4, I should say, or the Long Live Play Michael ad, which was also really incredible. So they are no strangers to understanding their history, referencing it, and also having appreciation and letting customers bask in that reverence for the platform and what it's meant to us over a 30-year period. And certainly for me, what I can say is that this company has changed my life. It's my career is covering PlayStation. And so it's always really cool seeing these things, and it does make you feel a type of way, I'll admit it. Anyway, moving on to another 30th anniversary announcement, which is My First Gran Turismo, which comes out today. So as we mentioned previously, this was one free trial version of Gran Turismo 7 coming out very soon for PS4, PS5. So that is now available on PSN. There is 3 race events, 3 time trials, and 3 music rally stages, as well as a full suite of licensed tests that you can jump into. It also includes 18 unique cars, and the available tracks are the Kyoto Driving Park, Deep Forest Raceway, and the Trial Mountain Circuit. with full PSVR2 support, I might add. So if you have a PSVR2 headset but have not wanted to make that full leap into buying Gran Turismo 7, you can download this trial version and just play everything in VR and see what that game is like in VR, because it really is like borderline a system seller for PSVR2. It is incredible to play the entire game in VR, and if you're a big racing enthusiast, there's really no other way to play that game than getting a proper racing bucket seat and a racing wheel and then strapping on the PSVR2. It's an incredible experience. So now you have a free version of GT7 to jump into, and that should be available today. Now, something else to also quickly mention as a PSA here is the PlayStation 2024 wrap-up, because they do that every year. They've done it for a long time now, which is logging into your PSN on PlayStation.com and getting the cool wrap-up page showing you some stats of games you've played, genres, trophies earned, things like that. That's going to be available on December 10th, so it's not available just yet, but it should be live in a few days. Next up, let's talk about PlayStation tournaments, because Sony has been for a while now investing in the esports space, with most notably having a joint ownership of EVO now, but with PS5 tournaments on the console, they are now elevating this a step further with a live event in London. So that is going to take place on January 18th, 2025. It's the PlayStation Tournaments XP event. So qualifying players around the globe will represent teams based on the face buttons. So there's going to be a team cross, triangle, circle, and square. You can qualify via regular tournaments online on PS5. That's where you can earn the trip to London. They should be, if you make it to the very end, mind you, you can qualify. Then they're going to pay for lodging and travel and things like that. But the qualifiers are open right now for Tekken 8, EA Sports FC 25, and Fortnite. And then Astrobot qualifiers, awesome to see that, is going to be open on December 13th. So very cool. It does seem like the company wants to go into a direction of having their own named events, because again, they do have a joint ownership of EVO, which I don't follow EVO too closely. From what I gather, it's been something where, of course, PlayStation does play a pretty big role in that event now, and consoles have always been present at EVO, where they're playing on PlayStation 5s for a lot of those games. But you know, in the case of like moving on to something like this, I would presume Sony also wants this to take off as well, because it is tied directly into the, you know, on-console experience playing tournaments with, you know, again, Tekken or EA or something like that, or EA Sports FC, I should say. Yeah, it seems like a natural step. I don't know if this would really stick per se, but they're going to be live streaming this, and who knows if this really does catch on. Maybe they'll do more of them. But, you know, if you already actively play tournaments on PS5, then surely this is something you might want to take a look at. Moving on to some hardware news here, starting off with PSVR2, where the headset has gotten a very big behind-the-scenes software upgrade, which is now available for future games, and that is full-blown hand-finger detection without PSVR2 Sense controllers. So this was shown off during SIGGRAPH Asia 2024, where there was a demo on the show floor showing off a cleaning-like minigame that uses hand gestures only, no Sense controllers. And so the booth did clarify that this library of features is now available on the latest PS5 SDK, also stating that it does recognize 60 FPS with low latency and displays hands smoothly. Currently, there's 12 gestures, 12 types of gestures that are detected. So that's going to be things like pinching, grabbing, and pointing. Those are all supported, which means this now opens up the door to the kind of software and experiences that can be shipped on PSVR2. You know, the Sense controllers does have finger detection, but considering you're holding PSVR2, that can be, you know, a little bit narrow as far as like what can be done in the game. But it also is one of those things where, you know, if you remove the buttons, that in a way narrows it in the other direction. I mean, we can sort of boil this down in a much more simpler term of like, especially with consoles, mind you, we've had console experiences with like cameras pointing at the user. That could be the iToy, the PlayStation Eye, the Kinect. And we saw how when you take buttons out of the equation, there's really not that many things you can do. And now, obviously, that's a lot more crude as far as like you're just, you know, grabbing things or pushing things around or smacking things out of view. But I think you kind of get the point I'm laying down, which is it's a different kind of experience that you can build around that is better suited for that type of interaction. So in this case, maybe having a bit more articulation with your fingers, not needing buttons, it just opens up the door to a different kind of experience that is more conducive to that input method. So having said that, it's great to see it's now in there for PSVR2, and also good to know that PSVR2 still has a lot of development ongoing for the SDK as well. We know that Sony is still, for the time being, committed to developing the VR space further, especially as far as R&D goes. Now, if they're committed to doing that from a consumer point of view, where they ship, say, another next generation PSVR, that is somewhat questionable, I will say, which makes me a bit nervous because I love the VR space. I think Sony should stay in it, but with that in mind, we've got this happening right now for PSVR 2. Hopefully we do see more games that end up utilizing this, and Sony develops it further with more gestures that can be recognized. Now, another PSVR 2 news, we should also mention this real quick, which is a brand new update for the Steam app for PSVR 2, version 2.5.0, which this one only has a few changes in there, but the company has naturally improved the stability and performance and improving the messages and usability on some screens. So whether you're on PlayStation or off, you are always going to get that changelog item for their software. So there's that. But you'll also be notified if your controllers aren't working properly because of a poor Bluetooth connection. And you will have the option to turn that notification off if, let's say, your connection is fine, but maybe it just keeps going on the screen or something like that. This has been an issue for PSVR 2 on PC for a little bit now, based on your own device, and maybe there's, if your environment has a lot of Bluetooth instabilities going on, maybe there's just a lot of interference, so the company is just trying to make it easier for players to troubleshoot whatever is going on with their setup. So seems like a fine minor update, really. I think most people at this point are waiting for PSVR 2's actual features with the Sense controller and the haptic feedback in the headset to be then turned on at some point on PC. So maybe that will come eventually, but it was not in this update. Now, moving on to the portable PS5 rumor, we have another update going on here, which is simply a minor update in that the folks over at Digital Foundry have now corroborated this rumor by saying that they too have heard about this. They actually heard about it a few months ago, apparently, which this is something where they do clarify they're not in the business of leaking things. So when they hear about something, they're not ever going to be the first ones to talk about it. But now that this is out there, they did chime in with, yes, we have heard about this. And they also touch on the expected compatibility, which in their view, the PS5's current SoC simply is not going to be squeezed into a small enough form factor for a handheld, even in a few years, which they're talking about, as we've discussed before, considering thermals and power draw. They would expect it would be a situation of games just getting a handheld mode via a patch. But that would be for PlayStation 5 software in particular, which that was the one angle we were talking about with this device, is that in terms of the position of when it ends up coming out, and it would be near the end of the PlayStation 5 life cycle, and that's also right before PlayStation 6. So is it a matter of whitelisting and blacklisting certain games? Is it a matter of this being a new mandate from Sony where every game that you ship on PlayStation 5 from X, Y, and Z, sort of date, and also PlayStation 6 now at this point has to have a PS6 mode, or will they not mandate it, but it's just in the SDK where you can scale down your game tremendously and therefore you can offer a portable mode? And that would be for the kind of software that's really going to be far and above what the handheld is really capable of. I mean, the sort of semi-safe expectation, as we've said, is that this would have a lot of PS4 logic baked in to where it's going to play the vast majority of PS4 games just native, but PS5 stuff, that's not really going to be feasible per se. There's so many unknowns. I think the safe thing to say is that, yeah, we're looking at a device that is going to have some specific modes made for it, but not to retread the conversation over and over. It just seems like, okay, we've got more and more evidence, mounting evidence, I should say, of this thing being a reality and happening at some point. What we can say, I think reasonably, is that with Sony working on this now, at a certain point, more studios, if some have not already been briefed on it, they surely will at some point. And that's where there's going to be some decent headroom going into the late life cycle of PlayStation 5 to where we could see, just like PS5 Pro even, a lot of games get support, because PS5 Pro is already up to 60 something games that are patched on PSN, with 100 plus already confirmed down the road. And for the foreseeable future, a studio is probably going to offer a PS5 Pro setting. So in theory, going into PlayStation 6, there's still enough room there where whether it's a PS5 or a 6 game, if a studio wants to support the handheld mode, then they easily could, and you've got a very conducive hybrid environment where you now have the option of playing some games portably if you buy this upcoming PlayStation Portable. Very exciting times are upon us. I am fascinated to see what this thing ends up looking like, but that'll be a while from now. So on LTPS, we will be following the development of this thing very closely. All right, moving on to a more formal acknowledgement of AI and what it means for the PlayStation business. So we have Herman Hulst, the CEO of the Studios Business Group, recently speaking with the BBC, touching on this topic in particular. And so he did give a very small quote here, but he did, talk about the potential of it to revolutionize gaming, elaborating further with saying, and I quote here, "I suspect there will be a dual demand in gaming, one for AI-driven innovative experiences, and another for handcrafted, thoughtful content. Striking the right balance between leveraging AI and preserving the human touch will be crucial." Now, we already know Sony has acknowledged this to some degree with the corporate strategy meeting where they've openly talked about using AI in game development for things like asset creation or quality assurance, which that, as far as like what a shareholder might want to hear is great. But for those that work directly in the business, it's very scary, especially because these things are still sort of accelerating at a rapid pace with the kind of tools that are available and what might be available in just 1 to 2, 3 years. But we've already seen a crazy amount of layoffs and redundancies made in the games business within the past 2 years. This year was brutal. So to see more of this coming is not exactly encouraging. But it's, as we've said before, like it has a place in the business. It has a place in every business, every possible sector you can think of. Because again, my sort of long-term, crazy, sort of morbid, but still fascinating conversation piece that I always think about with AI and where technology goes is that in 50 to 100 years, we could live in a jobless society because so many things are going to be automated. But in this, very turbulent period where the first iterations of this technology is now being put in place, it's going to be a very hard transition for that human work to be pushed out to a degree. But as Herman says, there has to be an element of human touch. It will always be there to some degree, especially because at a certain point, if you even try to eliminate all human work, there's always going to be that desire for, knowing that, oh, this content was made by a human. It was entirely made by a person. And that's going to always have a sort of je ne sais quoi to it. Even for some of the most die-hard AI evangelists, that's not going to be enough to overcome the wanton desire of something that was made by a person. I know we're having sort of a larger overarching conversation about this, but that's how I always tend to think about these things. But in the here and now, it's tough to have a certain level of confidence with a big company like Sony and how they will navigate using AI in their business. And will this be a very safe transition? And will they be able to handle it in such a manner that is perhaps more graceful than other big multi-billion-dollar corporations? I'm not so sure about that. It makes me very nervous, but at least for a PR answer, that is the PR answer to give, which is, yeah, it's going to be here, it's going to change things, but we need to have humans in place that still gives that human touch. It's the right thing to say, but remains to be seen if that's what's going to hold true long term. Moving on to some more interesting quotes, this time coming from Shawn Layden, the former president and CEO of Sony Computer Entertainment America, and also the former chairman of Worldwide Studios. Shawn, of course, having left in 2019, since then, has been doing a lot of interviews and podcasts and things like that, talking about the unsustainability of the business and consoles, and so he's always got some fascinating insight, especially from drawing on his years of experience at Sony, because he was there for a very long time. And so in this case, for the 30th anniversary of PlayStation, he was speaking with Eurogamer, talking about how it's actually been very hard to reach a new generation. So one problem he also touched on, which I believe we've talked about before, but it's how the problem nowadays isn't necessarily an Xbox versus PlayStation versus Nintendo thing. It's more of a gaming versus TikTok thing. It's a generational problem of if people are spending their time somewhere else, how do you get those people back into games? Well, games are very costly nowadays, and it's tough to make new experiences. So, as far as the rising costs for AAA game development and how that's completely squeezed out risk tolerance, he gave a really good quote here where he says, and I quote, "It's like we're at the end of the 18th century and we're realizing that building cathedrals is really expensive. Can we continue to build these massive edifices to God for this incredible amount of labor and time, or should we just build 4 walls and a roof, and that's a church, right? I'm afraid we've built AAA gaming into a kind of cathedral business, and it just can't grow any further. In fact, it's probably grown too far already." Now, that is not the first time Shawn has been very outspoken about AAA game development, so it's something he's been very consistent with as far as how he feels with how expensive games are to make nowadays. But it adds that much more context with what he was doing towards the very end of his stint at PlayStation. Not even stint, again, it was a very long time that he was at the company, but, being chairman of Worldwide Studios, which right up to the end, I would assume that was more of a sort of honorary role because we still don't know exactly what went down with his leaving PlayStation, what appeared to be so suddenly, and we know he was on sabbatical for a little bit, and who knows what kind of agreement he signed out the door and whatever sort of, however long it would take for us to get the real story into why he left the way that he left. There's always been some hints here and there as far as maybe some friction with other leadership and the direction they wanted to take the company, and maybe Shawn was advocating more for not just these original risky experiences, but some that maybe weren't nearly as expensive and wouldn't have led to the sort of image that PlayStation has nowadays. Now, he was still sort of right in the heyday of late life cycle PS4, where that's when the company sort of earned that reputation for the big AAA experiences. But, the context of this conversation is every console cycle, the budgets were pretty much doubling. So going from $1 million to 2, 4, then upwards of 10 plus on PlayStation 3. Then we got up to 50 to 100 million on PS4. And now we're at PlayStation 5, where we've already got examples of it being 300 plus, which is an obscene amount of money. So it's still a genuine concern that at a certain point, maybe we do have to dial it back down a bit and maybe not have to have 100+ hour games. We do have to sort of reset the tone of what it takes to make a really good video game nowadays. Now, something else Shawn also touched on was the console business just overall. He was asked if consoles can exist long term. Is PlayStation still going to be around in 30 years just by publishing on its own console and PC? And he gave a few answers here, and I quote, "Frankly, we have to start interrogating what the purpose is of a proprietary console, and whether that can continue to be true. I remember seeing the PS2 demo for Gran Turismo and not believing this could happen in a home console, but it did. The jump from PS2 to PS3 was also remarkable. We got to an HD standard. We got not all, but a lot of 60 FPS gameplay. It had a network capability, nascent though it was. Then PS3 to PS4 was just like getting the network thing done right. Then to PS5, which is a fantastic piece of kit, but the actual difference in performance, we're getting to the realm, frankly, where only dogs can hear the difference now. You're not going to see another PS1 to PS2 jump in performance. We have sort of maxed out there. We're at a point now where the innovation curve on the hardware is starting to plateau or top out. At the same time, the commoditization of the silicon means that when you open up an Xbox or a PlayStation, it's really pretty much the same chipset. It's all built by AMD. Each company has their own OS and proprietary secret sauce, but in essence, it's the same. I think we're pretty much close to final spec for what a console could be." Now, we can't quote the entire thing, but there is some missing context there in that one aspect that he touched on was PlayStation 3 and also the PS2 with, say, the Emotion Engine or PS3 cell processor. It's something that's been well documented. We talk about it here a lot on LTPS, which is these consoles that have very bespoke, obtuse architectures that were very different, very unique, and in a way also really hard to program and make games for. With PlayStation 3, the sort of history lesson there is that there was this pipe dream internally from Sony, which was at a certain point, economies of scale would kick in beyond PlayStation 3 because Cell would be utilized outside of PlayStation 3, and it would be in, say, laptops, televisions, even PCs, and it would be something right next to AMD and NVIDIA per se, right? As far as the kind of silicon that would be on the market. But that did not happen, and here we are today where everything's a lot more standardized, and you can just go to certain vendors and sure, you can buy and pick out certain GPU features out of the AMD roadmap, but that's kind of where we're at nowadays. Having said that, I don't really agree with his concern because that is what he's getting at. He's not outright saying consoles are dead or irrelevant or that they're for sure going to die and not make it for another 20, 30 years. It's just concern that, hey, here are the reasons that I can back up my concern, and those reasons are very much true. As far as like the leap in performance or how the boxes are very standardized nowadays and they're all built by AMD, and so he's not wrong there. Just I disagree with sort of the concern in general of maybe we should interrogate if consoles can really make sense in 20, 30 years. Now, in hindsight, we know those comments never really aged well. They really ramped up during the PS3 360 cycle, and so in hindsight, we know those comments look very silly. I always find that consoles will have their place for a very long time, possibly up to 20, even 30 years, because they offer that price to performance convenience, and it's all baked into a very digestible package to a point where even some today, you see it even anecdotally. I'm not saying this is data driven, but you will often find people saying that they're leaving PC for, say, a PlayStation 5 or a Series X because they just want to get back down to the very plug and play experience of a box that has a very favorable price to performance ratio. And that's what consoles are. You have a big manufacturer like Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo stepping in, paying for the economies of scale, getting these boxes into a very small, nice form factor, plug and play, highly optimized operating system that can install patches for you, handle firmware updates, just lets you easily navigate your software easily. And so consoles have always been that, and they should always be that. When they stop being that, then in my view, they're not really consoles anymore. So as long as they can continue to be that, even with this land of diminishing returns, and they're not these really bespoke, obtuse architectures anymore. I mean, they don't necessarily have to be that, and they haven't since PS4 and Xbox One, and they're still, for the most part, I don't want to say thriving, because consoles have always had this sort of ceiling as far as how many units they sell in any given cycle. That's been historically well known at this point, so I can't see that number going down dramatically, but there should always be a marketplace where if somebody wants to make and sell a console, there's going to be a very big audience that is willing to buy that console in droves. So in my view, I find it will be around for quite a while. Now, streaming could absolutely eat into that aspect of the business, but it is still going to be quite a while for broadband to catch up and be that reliable for the amount of households that consoles are being catered to, especially on a global scale. So if we're talking 20, 30 years, it's really tough to make that judgment call. But I think consoles still will always be that price to performance plug and play convenient box, and there's always going to be a buyer for that. All right, moving on to Amazon's secret level video game themed anthology series coming out very soon, December 10th. Just thought we'd mention that the reviews came out for the show and not looking too hot. A lot of 5 out of 10s, kind of in the middle, a lot of problems. It is an anthology series, so certain episodes are going to rise far above other ones. And so in this case, what we can mention is that the finale episode, which is the PlayStation one, I guess is like one of the worst ones. Like, it's really bad because it's like a weird isekai, I guess, glorified advertisement for PlayStation characters, and there's just a bunch of cameos and things. So the like brief seconds where you see Kratos, like that's actually all that's in there, and there's a few other ones that pop up, but otherwise it feels like a big PlayStation advertisement, which is a big bummer because I think it would have been really cool to see all these iconic characters in this kind of setting. So they really dropped the ball on that one. And the Concord episode is, I guess, really hard to enjoy, given that we also know at this point in the game, Concord, if it was out and doing even just mildly okay, then it already would have been deep into, well, would have still been season 1, I think, right? Or season 2, but a new character probably would have also shown up alongside the Concord episode, and so in light of that, that doesn't really work out all that well. So it's just, yeah, it seems like the secret level show has some issues. Let's just put it that way. Moving on to some end of the year, game of the year awards. Some places do run these events more on the early side, so around December is when some of these things start getting announced. And so for TIGA 2024, which is a UK industry event, Helldivers 2 won Game of the Year, so awesome to see that. It won Game of the Year, Best Visual Design, and Best Technical Innovation. And then for the PlayStation Asia Japan Partner Awards 2024, Stellar Blade won the User's Choice and also the Special Award categories. So great to see that as well. I mean, this is something where I like to say this a lot, but it's like there are multiple publications. Your favorite game is probably going to win some kind of big award somewhere. So in the case of Stellar Blade and Helldivers 2, they've already taken home some pretty big accomplishments here. So great to see, especially for Helldivers 2, given that it was an earlier release in 2024, and despite it, taking over the world for like a month and a half, 2 months, it is a bit tougher for some of those early year games to then show up towards the end, unless it was really a dry year going into the back half. But very happy to see Arrowhead take something home. Now, with all that said, it is time for Let's Talk Plus, the weekly Let's Talk PlayStation giveaway, where one of you can win a $10 PSN code. I would like to congratulate this viewer right here. I'll be contacting you very soon via email or X, and if you would like to win a $10 PSN code, it is so simple. Follow the link down below, enter the Gleam giveaway, and supporting this channel, a number of ways can gain you an entry, and I'll announce the winner next week, because I'm trying to help pay for your games. Those are all the stories from this past week that I wanted to talk about with you all. And we had on Monday our PS5 Pro 3-week review, so finally covering most of the console with Game Boost, Pro patch titles, PS4 image enhancements, PSVR2 titles, just our first initial PS5 Pro review. And then Wednesday, we had another marathon upload, which is the first 15 episodes we've done so far of the collection update. So that's just another one where if you like having those long form, turn it on and leave it in the background kind of things, then you can start adding that to whatever sort of playlist you have going on there. And then coming up, we have probably 2 more uploads this week. PSR is probably going to be the following week or maybe the week after. It really depends on where I'm at with certain projects, but we do have some exciting things coming up before the year closes out. But that is pretty much it. So that concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Ryan Benecki. Thank you all so much for talking with me, and I will see you all next Friday.